This has been about an 18-month process, but today is really the beginning of an important collaborative dialogue between 7 counties and 27 municipalities which make up the First Coast region. And to kick off today's program, it's my pleasure to introduce Ed McMahon. Ed holds the Charles E. Frazier Chair on Sustainable Development at ULI, where he's nationally known as an inspiring and thought-provoking speaker and a leading authority on topics related to sustainable development, land conservation, smart growth, and historic preservation. As the Senior Fellow for Sustainable Development, he leads ULI's worldwide efforts to conduct research and educational activities related to environmentally sensitive development policies and practices. He's the co-author or author of 15 books and over 200 articles. He holds a master's in urban studies from University of Alabama and a law degree from Georgetown. Please welcome Ed McMahon.
Thank you, John, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I really think this is a reality check, given the weather, and you're all here, right? Well, it's an honor to be here in St. Johns County and in Northeast Florida for this terrific event. You know, this is my 8th reality check, and I don't think I've ever seen a larger, more enthusiastic crowd than you have here today, so I congratulate you on that. I know the economy is on everyone's mind, but we're here to discuss something a little bit different today. We're here to discuss the future of this region, and this is a great region in a great state, but it's also a growing region in a growing state. In the next 50 years, you're going to get 1.6 million more people. Where are you going to put them? And what is this region going to look like after they've all moved here? I believe, ladies and gentlemen, that we are at the beginning of a new era in America, a new revolution, if you will. A revolution that's going to affect our lives and in many ways going to be more important than the Industrial Revolution. And this is the sustainability revolution. This is about finding better, smarter, greener, more energy efficient and more attractive ways to live, to work, to get around. And to succeed in this new era, we need a new shared vision for the future. So what is visioning about? Well, it's really about this. It's about our children. It's about our grandchildren. It's about the future, and it's about planning for the future. It's also about balance, harmony, if you will, between the city and the suburbs, between small towns and rural areas, between conservation and economic development, between the built environment and the natural environment. I believe that both visioning and sustainability require us to solve problems at the right way, at the right scale. Air pollution, water pollution, traffic congestion, loss of green space, these are all regional problems, and they require regional solutions. You know, you can't do it alone. You need to work together, and that's what today is all about. It's about working together, trying to find those common values and commitments. You know, whether you're a developer, an environmentalist, an elected official, a businessman, or a soccer mom, I believe that values are widely shared and deeply felt. I also believe that you can build consensus around them. You know, in his well-known book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Individuals, Stephen Covey wrote that effective individuals are proactive. They begin with the end in mind. They think win-win. They seek first to understand and then to be understood. I believe that successful regions have the same set of traits. And I believe that today is about trying to do some of those things, seeking first to understand and then to be understood. Putting first things first. Being proactive. Thinking win-win. Visioning is also about choices. You can grow by choice or you can grow by chance. What's the best way to predict the future of the First Coast? Well, it's to create it yourself. To create it yourself. You know, you can build a region that's centered around the automobile, or you can build a region that provides real transportation choices and options. I mean, think about it this way. Would you rather live in a neighborhood where your children have to be driven to school, or in a neighborhood where you could drive them to school, or they could walk to school, or they could take a bicycle to school? Which one provides more options, more choices? Today is thinking about what are the choices for the future. Finally, visioning and sustainability are really about positioning this region to be a better competitor in the global economy. In today's world, the nexus of competitive advantage has shifted to those places that can attract and retain the best talent. Mobility, livability, sustainability, and identity are all key in that. Remember when I graduated from college, and kids would go and, try to find a job, and then they would move to any city they could find a job in. But, things changed over the last, 30, 40 years. Now kids figure out where they want to live. They move to those cities and they start looking for a job. It's all about quality of life. It's about competitiveness. And, it's not about Nassau County versus Baker County or Clay County or Duval versus St. John. It's about the First Coast versus the Triad or versus Metro Atlanta or Birmingham. That's who you're in competition with, the other great regions of the world. You are all citizens of a region. Somebody said last night, that quoted Benjamin Franklin talking about when he signed the Declaration of Independence, saying, "Gentlemen, if we don't hang together, we'll all hang separately." And I think that's true if we think about the future. So why visioning now in this terrible environment? Because, ladies and gentlemen, adversity can breed opportunity. And also because we have some huge problems that we need to address going forward. Leadership is really acting before you have to. And that's really one of the reasons I congratulate you for all being here today, because you are acting before you absolutely have to. So what about some of the reasons that are things going on in the world? What about climate change? Perhaps the biggest challenge of our generation. And really, regardless of what you think about climate change, it has become a business and regulatory imperative. 900 cities have adopted the Kyoto Accord. 37 states have climate action plans. Congress is right now debating cap-and-trade legislation, which will change everything in America. This week, the President adopted new fuel efficiency standards for cars. It is a business and regulatory imperative. And what about energy prices? Now, everybody says, well, we're happy they're down. Remember last summer when the energy was $146 a barrel, $4 a gallon. Do you think, what's going to happen to energy prices when the economy improves? Do you think they're going to stay down? Or do you think they might go back up again? Anybody believes that we're going to have low energy prices for the rest of our lifetimes? Let me say one word to you: China. China, where car sales have been growing 100% a year. Take Beijing now. There's only 16 million people live in Beijing, and only 3 million of them have cars. Just imagine what happens when everyone in Beijing and every other city. There's 41 cities in China right now that have more than 1 million people. There are 20 cities that have more than 10 million people. Think about, and then add India to that mix, et cetera, et cetera. What was our energy policy for so many years in America? It was, to maximize demand, to minimize supply, and to send all our money to the people who hate us. It's a national security issue as well. And what about land use? Think about land use in America. Here's what we've been doing for years: large lots and big shopping malls everywhere, strip malls. Think about those large lots, too small to farm, too big to mow. It's about choices. Our families have gotten smaller and smaller, but we've each been using more and more land. Our footprint has been increasing, and this is true in every region of the country, certainly true in Florida. And all this spreading out has simply meant we have to drive everywhere for everything. We drive everywhere for everything. I lived in Europe for a number of years, and one of the things I learned about the Europeans is they don't hate cars. They like cars just as much as we do. The simple difference is they don't have to use them all the time because they have far more transportation choice than we do. And think about our infrastructure deficit. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been losing our competitive edge in the world. China's been spending 9% of GDP on infrastructure. Europe, 5% of GDP. We've been spending less than 2% of GDP on infrastructure. Think about our passenger railroad system, for example. Well, we have a passenger railroad system in America that the Bolivians would be ashamed of. It's a third world system. It's slow, it's infrequent, or it's non-existent. Try to go from Houston to Dallas by train. Well, you can do it. There's one train a day. It takes 15 hours. Fly into Frankfurt, Germany. You want to go to Berlin? Well, there's 30 trains a day, and they go almost 200 miles an hour. That's what our competitors are doing, ladies and gentlemen. And what about population growth? Well, we're a growing nation. We're the only industrialized nation that's growing rapidly. You know, we're going to have 100 million more people by 2050. You're going to have 1.6 million more people. And think about how demographics are changing as well. Today, only about 25% of American households have school-aged children. Well, who are the rest of these people? Well, they're single parents, retirees, empty nesters, unrelated singles. How are we going to accommodate all those non-traditional households? You need to be thinking about that in the future. But you know, I think that visioning is about more than vehicle miles traveled or greenhouse gas emissions or energy use. It's also about what makes Florida, Florida. It's about what makes the first coast, the first coast. You know, in ancient Athens, the city leaders used to take an oath of office to leave their city not less, but greater, more beautiful and prosperous than it was left to them. And I believe that's our challenge as well. How do we leave the first coast? Not less, but greater, more beautiful and prosperous than it was left to us. And that's kind of an important question because while we've done a pretty successful job in America at saving our landmarks, we've simultaneously been losing the landscape that gives those landmarks their larger sense of meaning. And while we've been cleaning up air and water pollution, and yes, our air is cleaner by and large, and yes, our water is cleaner by and large, but while we've been cleaning up our air and water pollution, we've simultaneously been losing our sense of place. I mean, if I were to take you up along a road outside of most Florida cities today, you simply wouldn't know where you were because it all looks exactly the same. I mean, you know, I think we need to think about three things this morning. We need to think about where we put development, how do we arrange development, and also what development looks like. The real problems about development have nothing to do with development per se. It's about these things. Where do we put it? How do we arrange it? What does it look like? It seems to me that the first principle of better development in America is figuring out where we should not develop. Tell you something funny about those houses, guess what? They're all gone now. You know, because building out in front of the dune line, not really the smartest thing in the world to do. Or how about building in a floodplain? Or how about on a steep slope like this? You know, I want to suggest to you, ladies and gentlemen, that you need a long-range conservation plan in the First Coast just like you have a long-range transportation plan. And why do I say that? Well, there's lots of reasons, but first of all, you want to alleviate opposition to development. That's one of the best ways to do it, to have a long-range conservation plan. Why do I say that? Well, think about this. Suppose you're driving down the interstate at about 65 miles an hour, and all of a sudden you come to a fog bank. What do you want to do? You want to slam the brakes on, right? Because you can't see where you're going. That's exactly what people in this state and so many other places in America have wanted to do with growth when they couldn't see what the future looked like. You know, if you can reach consensus about those places that you should preserve, you can also reach consensus about those places that you should develop. And so one of the best ways to alleviate opposition to development is to figure out ahead of time where you shouldn't develop. And that principle can apply at every scale, from the site scale to the neighborhood scale to the regional scale. You know, how do we arrange development? Kind of an important issue. You know, there's a lot of different ways to arrange development. We can spread out, or we can grow more compactly. We can have mixed uses or single uses. We can grow more vertical or more horizontal. You know, we can have a Best Buy that looks like this, or we can have a Best Buy that looks like that. You know, think about the differences. You know, I understand that everybody in America is not ready to sleep upstairs and shop downstairs, although we did that in the world for hundreds and hundreds of years, and some people kind of like that idea. But you know, mixed use can be pretty simple. Here's a mixed use project in Herndon, Virginia. It's a new Dairy Queen. It has a dentist office upstairs. How appropriate. But think about this. Would you rather live next door to a dentist office or a house full of out-of-control teenagers? It's not the use, it's the impact of the use that is so important. And you know, the truth is, you know, mixed use is pretty darn important because we can't address our energy issues and we can't address our greenhouse gas issues unless we stop driving so much. And, you know, why do we drive so much? Because we basically have no choice. This is, you know, what most of us face every day, right? Well, here's the good news. The good news is if you live in a compact, mixed-use, walkable community, people drive less. There are shorter trips and fewer trips. This doesn't mean everybody has to do this, but suppose some people did this. You know, I was in Houston not too long ago. They were talking about their long-range transportation plan. And they have the largest long-range transportation plan in the United States. It's $150 billion, and they don't have $150 billion. And so the head of the regional planning agency was showing the transportation plan. He said, you know, if we built $150 billion worth of new highways, congestion will be worse when we finish than when we started. You know, then what he did, he showed a picture of the new Woodlands Town Center. A walkable, compact, mixed-use town center. He said, that's a transportation project. He said, if we had 75 of those in this region, we wouldn't have to build $150 billion worth of highways because we wouldn't need to drive around as much. You know, think about the choices for the future. Now, I understand there's some obstacles to the future. You know, Americans have made it pretty clear that there's a couple things they don't like. They don't like sprawl particularly, and they also don't like density. Well, duh, there's a problem, right? So if that's the case, what are we going to do? Well, I think that, you know, you can't just take more houses that are all tan, beige, putty, and taupe and put them closer together and think everybody's going to like that. Density requires the best-looking houses, high-quality design. It also requires you, as you grow a community, to green the community at the exact same time. You know, compact design does not imply high rises or even necessarily uniformly high density. You don't have to put density everywhere. You only need to put it in a few places, in key nodes and locations. It's also about design. Here's Sun City, Arizona, 5 units an acre. There's the Battery in Charleston, almost 9 units an acre. Which one do you like better? You know, it's not about density, it's about design. Here's 2 ways you can do density. You know, here's a 37 unit per acre development in Las Vegas, and then look at the French Quarter. That's 38 units an acre. You know, think about the difference. Density can be attractive and valuable. You know, come to Washington, D.C. What are our 2 highest priced neighborhoods per square foot? They're Georgetown and Alexandria, Virginia, Old Town Alexandria. Now, all these houses are 150 years old at least, and they all cost at least $1 million, they're only 20 feet wide. Why are people paying $1 million for a house that's 150 years old? It's because they like to do home repairs? No, because they're paying to live in one of the most beautiful and charming and convenient and walkable neighborhoods on the planet. Turns out people will pay a lot of money for that. So think about how that impacts the future here. And also, as we grow, as I said, we also simultaneously need to green our communities. We need to grow and green at the same time. So how do we green a city, for example? Well, how about street trees and green parking lots and green roofs and green ways? Or how about green sound walls or community gardens or rain gardens or urban agriculture? And certainly urban and suburban parks. And I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that green space is valuable. Where's the highest priced real estate in the New York State? You're looking at it. It's the land next to Central Park. One of America's great mayors, Joe Riley, the mayor of Charleston, South Carolina, he likes to say a wonderful thing. He says, you give the best of the city to everyone. And you know, in Charleston, that meant the waterfront, right? So they used to have this industrial waterfront along the Cooper River, and all the industry left. And so people said, well, we got to redevelop that. And so all his aides says, we're going to put a bunch of new development down there. And Joe said, no, we're going to put parks along the river. And they said, Mayor, you can't do that. That's the most valuable land in the city. And Joe Riley said, no, you give the best of the city to everyone. You know, they built those world-class parks, and you know where the most high-priced real estate in all of South Carolina is today? It's the land next to those parks. The land next to those parks. So what about this last issue? What does development look like? Let me show you 2 communities. Which one makes a better first impression? Would you rather go to Franklin, Tennessee or Midfield, Alabama? Which one looks like a place you'd rather spend more time and money in? You know, ladies and gentlemen, the image of a community is fundamentally important to its economic well-being. I want to repeat that. The image of a community is fundamentally important to its economic well-being. What do I mean by that? What I mean is simply this. Every single day in America, people make decisions about where to live, where to vacation, where to retire, and where to invest based on what our communities look like. What they look like. Community character matters, ladies and gentlemen. It matters. You know, a friend of mine, Doug Kelbaugh, put it pretty succinctly. He said, if building a landscape or a city, it is not beautiful, it will not be loved. And if it is not loved, it won't be maintained and improved. In short, it won't be sustained. You know, so I'd like to end by just talking briefly about the secrets, what I believe are the secrets of successful regions and communities. Now, I grew up in a small town in Alabama, Bessemer, Alabama, outside of Birmingham. And I can tell you, having grown up in Alabama, that planning was not a particularly popular word. People would come up to me all the time and say, I'm against planning. I'd say, okay, well then you tell me the name of any successful organization, institution, corporation, or community that doesn't plan for the future. Failing to plan simply means planning to fail. As the book of Proverbs says, without vision, people will perish. And where do these visions begin? They begin by inventorying your assets. And then you try to build all your plans, whether it's a land use plan, an economic development plan, a tourism plan, what have you, around the enhancement of your existing assets. Successful communities use education, incentives, partnerships, and voluntary initiatives, not just regulation. Successful communities invest in infrastructure in themselves. Successful communities consider what they look like. Successful communities have committed citizens and strong leaders. You know, I love the story of Chattanooga, Tennessee. This is, growing up outside of Birmingham, this is the one city we used to make fun of. Now, what does that tell you? It was routinely referred to as a patch of rust in the Sun Belt. It was a dying industrial city. But nobody makes fun of Chattanooga anymore. Today, it's known as an international model for sustainable development. It all began with a vision for the future. They got thousands of people together and asked them, what do you want this city to be like in the future? What do you want to change? What do you want to improve? What do you want to keep? They decided to focus on two big things: downtown, because that's the heart and soul of any region, and the Tennessee River, because that was their most important natural resource. One of the things they did is, I don't know if you've been to Chattanooga recently, but they have this incredible park that goes all along the Tennessee River, both sides. It's almost 10 miles long now. And the original price tag on that park was very big. It was like over $30 million. That was a lot of money for a very small city in the 1970s. But Chattanooga realized something very important. They realized that the most important question, ladies and gentlemen, is not how much money you have or how much something costs. The most important question is, what should we do? What should we do? Money always follows good ideas. And that's what happened in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Well, let's talk about a small town example. How about Suisun City, California? 1989, it was voted the worst place to live in Northern California. This was their city hall. It was in 2 double-wide trailers. This is the only city hall in California had to register with the Department of Motor Vehicles. But public buildings matter. Public buildings matter, and they used to always be our most beautiful buildings. Whether it was the courthouse, the library, the public school, and they're always in the middle of our cities. But then after World War II, we just decided cheaper was better. As it turns out, cheaper is simply cheaper. And they realized that in this little community, and they said, why would anybody invest in a community that wouldn't invest in itself? So they built a new city hall right in that same spot, and it helped begin the transformation of that city. And a decade later, they were voted one of the best places to live in Northern California. It all began with a small investment that made people believe that they could transform their communities. Successful communities inventory their assets: natural, cultural, human, economic, educational. And then they build their plans around those assets. It's a lot less about what you don't have, and it's a lot more about what you do have. Sometimes the next community I was going to show you, there we go, or Annapolis, Maryland, with this incredible architectural legacy and its wonderful history. And of course, they built their plans around the enhancement of these assets. Or how about, the Research Triangle in North Carolina? How did that come about? They have 3 great universities. They said, how do we work together? How do we work together to capitalize on these resources? Sometimes the assets of the community are not very obvious. Welcome to Lowell, Massachusetts. It was a dying industrial city, 1975. It had an unemployment rate of 25%. Nobody had ever visited it as a tourist. They didn't think they had any assets, but they went through a visioning process. And they said, well, we got all these abandoned textile mills, maybe we could do something with them. And so they restored them all. And today this city has an unemployment rate equal to the national average. Today it gets 1 million tourists a year. It's become the Charleston, South Carolina of New England. Take a big city like Seoul, Korea, you know. This is kind of what they used to do in Asia. You know what that freeway is sitting on top of? It's sitting on top of a river. But it's gone now. They've replaced a 5-mile freeway with a 5-mile greenway. It all began with a vision for the future. Successful regions invest in 21st century infrastructure. Successful regions invest in themselves. World-class regions have world-class transportation systems. You know, and then we need to think about how we maximize our investments in infrastructure. So we just don't spend all our money in infrastructure and then don't use it correctly. We need to think about how we maximize the use of our infrastructure. Successful regions cooperate for mutual benefit. Successful regions explore beyond regulation. You know, why do we educate? We educate in order to reduce the need to regulate. Why do we educate? We educate because people will not adapt to what they don't understand. Why do we educate? Because people have a right to choose the future and to know what those choices are. What about incentives? Now, I understand, as Teddy Roosevelt once said, he said you can get a lot more done with a smile and a six-gun than a smile alone. But as Mark Twain used to like to retort, he'd say, you know, if the only tool you have is a hammer, then every problem starts to look like a nail. We need to use carrots, not just sticks. We need to use incentives. We also need to understand that all development is not created equal. You know, one of the biggest impediments to better development in the South, I can tell you, ladies and gentlemen, has been a fear of saying no to anything. And when you're afraid to say no to anything, you get the worst of everything. You know, communities that set high standards compete to the top. Regions that set low standards compete to the bottom. You know, would you rather have a Borders bookstore like this or a Borders bookstore like that? It's all about choices, ladies and gentlemen. Successful communities have committed citizens and strong leaders. You know, I always think about how hard it is to get things done. And I was reminded of that when I was in the Shenandoah Valley not too long ago, and I saw this sign in a little town called Buena Vista, Virginia. Welcome to Buena Vista, home of 6,002 happy citizens and 3 old grouches. Now, doesn't that kind of sum up life in any community? No matter what you come up with, there's going to be some people who are going to be against it. And, you know, because no is a very powerful word in America. But you know what's a more powerful word? Yes. Yes, we can make this a better place to live in, to look at, to work in, to visit. You know, a pessimist sees difficulty in every opportunity, and an optimist sees opportunity in every difficulty. I believe the people in this room are optimists about the future. And what about this idea of leadership? I said, you know, real leadership is acting before you have to. You know, the truth is, though, you can get a lot done if you don't care who gets the credit. You can get an awful lot done. A final thought, ladies and gentlemen, is that vision counts, but that implementation is priceless. Ladies and gentlemen, Florida is a great state. This is a great region with great people, great resources, and great potential. Let's take a chance to build a great future together. Thank you very much for having me here this morning.